It is. When is it good just to retreat, right? When is it good
Mhm.
to engage? And and that's important. It's important for us to recognize that within ourselves, but it's also important to recognize that with, the
Mhm.
people that we are engaging with, right? And that's the other side of EQ, or do you call it EI or EQ?
I just call it emotional intelligence. I try to
Okay.
avoid acronyms whenever possible. I hear EQ more often than EI,
Yeah.
um, but I
Yeah.
just usually call it emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just because yeah, I'm not big on acronyms either, especially like, when we're talking about important things like DEI and things. I think it's just a
Yeah,
throwaway rather than to
right,
actually say the names, say the words, speak
right.
the names,
Say it.
right? Speak the
Yeah.
words. But and just thinking about that idea of emotional intelligence as opposed to IQ, right? EQ tends to have, three times as significant of an outcome in dealing with other people in a professional setting, right?
Mhm.
It's 75-25, really, the power of emotional intelligence. It's one thing to know all the bells and whistles, right? And some people are looking for that. Some people want that answer. They want to know where you got that quote from and all those other things that we've already talked about. But, do you know how to communicate that with folks? Do you know how to be diplomatic? Do you know how to be tactful? Do you know how to come into a situation where you feel like this is something where we can all learn and grow and benefit from? And that's all emotional intelligence, right? And so, and that first half that we talked about was, just thinking about how we know ourselves. And but then also the other half is how we, how well do we know the people that we're interacting with? And also how well do we know how we land on those people, right? And so, that social awareness, right? The empathy, right? The awareness of the organization, the culture, right? Um, your idea of what it is to interact with people. For mine, it's really important for me to have a service orientation. How is this serving us? How am I serving you? How is this conversation benefiting us, you and me, but then also are there other people that are going to get something out of this conversation, right? If it's between me and somebody else at work, who are the people that we serve, right? Is it customers? Is it clients? Is it our coworkers? Is it our direct reports, right? Who are those people that are going to benefit from the conversation or, the the um the meeting that we have, right? Some people go into a meeting, I need to win. I need to win at all costs, and I don't care
Mhm.
about, I had a boss where people used to say, "Well, you always come and clean up all the dead bodies after she walks out." And I'm like, yeah, I'm the wolf, right? So, but it's no matter what the benefit is for the whole, some people get wrapped up in, I need to win, and that's all that matters. So, having that social awareness, right, is recognizing when we are serving, the not just ourselves, but other people, right? Including just that interaction, that empathy, right? And it's so important, empathy and so many people just, sometimes it's a throwaway word. Oh, you're so empathetic. Well, what does that mean to you? Right.
Mhm.
You know, and, or, what, I tried to be empathetic with somebody, somebody said, they called and said that they had to call in because their dog died. And I said, well, that's terrible. And I feel bad for you, but, that's not a family member. So you need to come into work. Right. Well, I was trying to sympathize. Some people mix up sympathy with empathy. Right. And, it's, that Brene Brown video, want a sandwich, right? As opposed to,
Mhm.
geez, your dog died, and tell me about your dog. Well, we've been, ever since I moved out of my parents' house, it's been me and him, and he integrated with our family, and my kids love him. And I said, okay, well, I hear you. I mean, we have sick time. I mean, in my head, you have sick time. You can take that, and I'm really sorry, that a family member of yours has died. If some
Yeah.
people don't see pets as family members, well, and then they're going to miss that boat. right? And so that's an important thing to recognize your ideas of what is important, what the focus is on things. I mean, I'm an only child, right? But I have people that I call, brothers and sisters, maybe about four or five people, right, in my life who, maybe I call that because that's how close we are in our families and whatnot. And and I've had people that say, well, why do you keep calling them that? They're not your brothers and sisters. And, I mean, and some people may really believe that, especially if they're very close with their blood relatives, right?
Mhm.
But at the end, and you wouldn't understand. Well, I may not understand, the specific dynamics of what it is to have blood relatives, blood siblings, but a lot of the emotions that people feel for each other. I mean, how can you tell me that I can't feel a certain amount of love and respect and honesty and support for somebody else? And especially since I know there's a lot of siblings that will go after each other's throats. I've been in relationships where the reasons the siblings got along is when one of the other siblings was struggling. That's when everyone else enjoyed themselves because they got to talk, crap about the one who's having a hard time. Then they come and help them, but they would do it just as for an air of superiority. That's not how my family system works, right? A couple of people I call my sister and my brother, we love each other, right? And we support each other and we're there for each other and we don't sit there and just enjoy we feel like crap when those things are happening, right? So how can you tell me that those feelings of love and support aren't necessarily equating to the relationship that you think we should have, right? And so that's an important thing with empathy. We get into our head our ideas are right or wrong, our moral systems, our value systems, right? And when we hear something that we don't think jibes from somebody else, we dismiss it as that's not right or that's wrong or you're incorrect when, the answer may just be, well, tell me more.
Mhm.
Why, tell me what leads you to call this person? What are the things that you've experienced? What are the reasons why you feel like this person is your sister, right? And so I think these things are so important to pay attention to recognize we don't always have the right answers, and that's what gets in the way, right, of that social awareness is for us to feel like you know other people's thoughts and feelings that do not cooperate with ours are invalid, and that's not empathy, right? When we invalidate emotions and feelings, that is not empathy, right? And empathy is about validating that other people's feeling about things, especially like in terms of crisis. I mean, your crisis might be different than my crisis, right? Or how I respond to things or what things are important. And for you to say, well, just get over it. It's not that important. That's not validating, how I'm feeling about the situation. So how is that connecting me to you? How is that helping me to feel like you actually do support me? Right. And that's an important thing to recognize. We don't have all the answers. And when somebody else is interacting with us, it's not always about us. But that's an intentional thought because our brain wants us to think about how it's all about us. We talked about in mind state, that idea of homeostasis. So really putting ourselves in that place where the conversation is two ways. It's about us expressing who we are and how we feel about things, then also being curious about who that other person is and how they express things.
Mhm. I think the key word you just said it was curious. Um, I know there's like that old phrase, before you judge somebody, walk a mile in their moccasins or, walk a mile in their shoes. That's not empathy. For me, when I think about empathy, it's I don't have to walk a mile in your shoes to see that they're uncomfortable for you. And I think the lack of empathy or the disconnect of empathy is that when people have an experience, they think about what they would think or what they would feel or how they would experience that same situation. I'm guilty of this. Can I say I'm most guilty of this with my older sibling? When I heard you talking about siblings, I'm like, do you want one? I've got a few I can give you. Let's
Yeah.
start. You can have my brother. You can have my brother because he's a handful. Love you, Robbie. But with that being said, you know, when my siblings would have an experience, we had the same life. Like we grew up, in the same home or the same experience. And so the way I responded to it was very different from maybe how my other siblings responded to it. And I have to just be honest. Um, in some of those conversations, I wasn't expressing empathy. It was more of frustration of like, why are you taking it like that? You can move beyond. You can do this. You could do that. And I recognize after the fact I wasn't being empathetic. I was instead being judgmental. Like I'm acknowledging and validating how you feel and then following up with you shouldn't feel that way. You should feel like this. That's not empathy. And so if I could do that all over again, if I could do that all over again, that's part of the apology tour that I'm on right now. So, thinking about other people's experience is really just like what you said. I need to be curious about your perspective and where you're coming from and do that from a space of non-judgment. I don't have to feel how you feel, but I can acknowledge how you're feeling and it can still be true even if I would respond in a different way. Like both things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
So that I think is the empathy. And part of that is very nuanced because with empathy, you are making some assumptions. I think they're feeling this way. I think this is what they're telling me. You have to check in and, I'm sensing some frustration from you. Like what are you experiencing right now? They might say, I'm not frustrated, I'm pissed off. And you're like, okay, great, let's explore that. Let's talk more
Yeah.
about that. But empathy too is that ability to like read the room too and kind of change your energy to fit like the space whatever's needed. um I was training the other day in a county far away, virtual, and during one of the breaks someone had a personal tragedy, and I won't share it here, it's not my story to tell, but I will say that something really devastating happened to one of the participants. And we come back, and it was a small place, everybody knew what had happened, and it was like read the room. I wasn't gonna Nobody was gonna learn anything more that day. Like it was such an overwhelming emotional experience that no matter what I did or how I did it, it just didn't feel right for the moment. And so, you know empathy was to for me feeling like the energy in the room was like an invitation, like this is a good time for us to practice some self-care. So why don't we all take like 15 minutes or so to just regroup? If you need to go for the day, I get it, there's not going to be any penalties, you can go for the day. If you feel like you can be here and you want to be here for the rest of our session, we're going to do it. And I'm not going to do breakout rooms. I don't feel like this is a good space for us to have super meaningful conversations because we're all very, like, the weight of the room is very heavy. And so I just made a decision that I was going to take care of the people. Whatever we learn in the class, we can learn at some other time. But in that moment, it was like, let's take care of what the people's needs are. And what they needed was some space, and it was fine. We got through the day. It was fine. Everything was, well, I mean, it was as fine as it could be given the circumstances. But I'm pretty much I mean, I try to be an upbeat person and like be a little silly, but that wasn't what that time called for. I needed to be empathetic to the needs of that audience, and what they needed was someone to love on them and care about their well-being. And so you have to be willing to pivot with the empathy. I can come in hot, like I'm hot and I'm ready to have this conversation, but if I notice that you're on a different wavelength, then I need to be able to kind of regulate that to meet the needs there, and maybe soften my approach, or maybe be a better listener than I am a communicator in that moment. Like that's to me what the empathy is that piece of
Mhm.
connection where you're really genuinely interested in the other person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that just having that empathy allows you to recognize that it's about the other person in that moment,
Mhm.
right? Because I mean, there's some people who say, "Oh, I'm sensing frustration." Well, there's an answer for that, right?
Mhm.
There's a pill for that. There's a cure for that, right? And so there are some people who are very well-meaning and think that the best way to address somebody's issue is to solve it for them, right? And and that gets in the way so much. When people are venting, when they're frustrated, when they're emotional, more often than not, they just want someone to hear them vent, feel a certain way, and be emotional, right? You start trying to solve their problem, they're not going to feel like you're hearing them. This is about how you would do things and how your solutions would be. One of the things that I'm learning in this coaching class, Tiff, is that if I'm not careful, that the questions that I ask can lead somebody down a path towards a solution that I think is the best. And that's manipulative.
Mhm.
And that gets in the way of, you know, we're going to bring Nora on one of these days. Nora Gerber's going to be on here because do no harm, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, that's something that's really important to me. How do I support somebody and not make the situation worse? And coming up with solutions without really hearing the entire situation or really empathizing with them, or first of all, is not empathetic because you're telling them how you would deal with it, which is maybe not in their capability or capacity or the preference that they have, right? Which is why you get people say, I don't know why this person, whose husband is beating her up, I don't know why she'd leave, or why she would stay. I would leave and I wouldn't deal with this. And I don't, in which you're telling this person there's something wrong with you, right? Which does not empower somebody to make a change. It very often makes them feel like they're retreating, right? And well, justifying sometimes, well, yeah, I mean, she thinks there's something wrong with me too. I mean, maybe I deserve it, or whatever else it is, or it's scolding, right? And, and so there's so many different challenges we have, but just even thinking about how that affects the way that we provide support for other people, which is that fourth domain there, relationship management, right? And how we develop others, right? How do we inspire folks and influence them and build capacity, right? And that's it. Telling somebody how to do something is completely different than having them recognize how to do something that they feel they're capable of doing and that they think is a best choice for them, right?
Mhm.
And it's such an important piece that I think a lot of us miss. We get in that problem solving mode, especially if we're good problem solvers. I mean, hell, I mean, how many people get into social work and you know other service oriented professions because they want to alleviate somebody else's pain or distress? And how often do they think I have the right way? You just need to do it. Well, if they just get a job, then their life would be so much better. That's not How often have we found out that's not the answer? People do get a job and it doesn't make life better, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
because there's 10 other things that have to be addressed before the job can be made permanent or, can really do the things that we expect it to do. Right. And so, just having that ability to hear people, to a problem with the customer, right. Or a problem with another coworker. Well, this is how I would deal with it. Just go talk to them. Just go talk to them and tell them how you feel. Well, what if that person has social anxiety? What if the reason that the issue is going forward is because they don't really know how to say it without hurting somebody else's feelings, or when they do confront people and they get emotional and it comes out the wrong way. But we haven't heard that. We just said, "Oh, just go talk to them. They're fine. I talk to them all the time." Hey,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Advice is very much like a double-edged sword because again, the intention of it is to be helpful. Like I don't think anybody gives advice like, "Oh, I'd like to make your life worse. Here's some advice to make your life harder." Like
Right.
most people do it with the intention of helping, but how people receive it can be harmful. And um and the opposite of empowering. So it's that's such a difficult, like I think you and I were talking a little bit about this before we got on here today about like it's difficult to switch gears from being like an instructor to a coach, because as an instructor your job and your role is to tell people, here's the model, here's this, let's practice. You're sharing information, but as a coach it's very different. You have to like be less judgmental and be more open and have more of that empathy, because it's not your problem to solve. Like the phrase I use here, which I really love, is I'm willing to listen to your problem without making it mine. And that's part of like that concept of people are capable, they can figure their stuff out. The problem with too much empathy is and I think that's where you're not in empathy anymore, you're now into something else, is that you're suffering, and so let me alleviate that suffering by telling you how to fix your problem, or here's a solution, or here's what you need to do, which doesn't usually fix the problem, it usually compounds it. And so, you know, I was thinking about this earlier, but I'm thinking about like great leaders that I've had in my sphere in my lifetime. And I it made me think, I was thinking specifically of one of my very first supervisors when I started in the county. And she ended up becoming like deputy director after I left. But her name is Mary Ellen. And one of the things that was unique about Mary Ellen compared to every other leader that I have had since, was that she was very emotionally intelligent. She was a thinking, feeling, normal human being, in the sense that she wasn't stoic. She wasn't a machine. She wasn't um, without humanity. She was very genuine, and she was very much a human being in terms of like emotions. And she was like very even keeled. And so she was easy to bring problems to because of that emotional intelligence. And if I was up here, because this was during my bang days, remember, I was a different person back then. So I was like here, like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, And she'd be like, okay, so step one, what's falling out of the sky? What do we need to do with that? Like, just really emotionally intelligent, where I would be up here and she would bring me down here, and I wouldn't feel emotionally manipulated. I wouldn't feel judged. I wouldn't feel shame. Like I could go in like the whole category 5 tropical storm that I was, and leave there feeling confident in whatever needs to be done, and I could move forward. And I realized what a gift that was until I lost it, because then she went on to do other things and I went on to do other things. But like that type of leadership was really like anchoring for me, and thinking about who I wanted to be as a leader, and who I wanted to be as someone that was, again, even in, and again, I'm not unemotional. I'm a very emotional person. Um, Emotional is not a bad word. Can I just say that louder for our friends in the back? Being emotional is not a negative thing. It means you're a human being. But again, knowing when it's the right time and how to approach these emotions to where it's healthy and you can get your needs met is critical. And in the workplace, again, I mean, I do this like work-life balance thing all the time, but we're one whole person. If I'm emotionally intelligent at home, I'm probably going to be more emotionally intelligent at work, and vice versa. But if I'm thinking about being emotionally intelligent in the workplace, that's the stability that I think people need to be successful. And in crisis and trauma rooted businesses like ours, human services is almost always rooted in somebody's crisis or somebody's trauma. Like that finds its way into our systems. It finds its way into how we engage employee to employee, leader to leader. Like we're always in this like space of chaos and crisis. But then we're taking people who are in active, real active crisis of poverty, of abuse, of neglect, of again, domestic violence, of drug use, all of that. And we're like, but just follow our rules. And then we have rules and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe the state's asking us to do this. This is great. Like, we don't display that emotional intelligence, but we're expecting our customers to. And that's like cognitive dissonance at its finest, or what's the other? I can't think of the other word right now. Like a double standard, where we don't show any emotional intelligence, but we expect it from other people,
Yeah.
and then we become again very judgmental. The empathy dissipates over time when it needs to increase versus decrease. I don't know. Have you experienced that where people become less empathetic and less connected the longer they do this?
Oh, 100%. People get burned out, right? I mean, dealing with emotions, if you don't have an outlet for your, you know, for dealing with emotions, I mean, if you don't know how to deal with them, if you are averse to them, if you see people acting out in a way that is not natural to you or that you think is correct or you were taught was not correct, it can wear you out. Right? It can
Mm-hmm.
make you feel like, you are in a place that's hopeless, right? I mean, burnout
Yeah.
is a real thing. We talk about you know, burnout, secondary traumatic stress, compassion, satisfaction, compassion fatigue, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy for people who work in a place where the success statistics are underwater. All right. Just even in terms of the statistics that we get, right? I mean, historically, client engagement in human services is under 50%. And when it goes over 50%, it's because we've cooked the books, we've counted things differently. But then also, what is the definition of a successful engagement, right? I mean, that depends. And so but we've been taught it's a specific thing. So when people are not successful on a regular basis, sometimes that wears on us, especially if we feel like, we take on, like you mentioned, I can listen to your problem, but I don't have to take it on. Some people, they take it on and they
Mm-hmm.
wear it and they feel like they're not making any difference. They're not making any change. You know, 9 of my 10 clients are failing or not participating or yelled at me or straight up lied to me. Well, what about that one family that's doing what they can to make a difference and turning their life around? What is your definition of success? Right. And so just thinking about how we approach success, how we approach failure, how we approach other people's success and failure. How can we respond in a way that is healthy? Right. And so there's definitely many ways that you can do that. You can be in therapy. You can have somebody who just you can talk to and process these things, right? You can have that mindset of, your problem is not mine, but I'm here to help address what I can in making progress, right? And sometimes we think, the fix is supposed to happen right away when most success is incremental, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it leaves people disgruntled and disillusioned. Well, success is not going to happen. Why? Well, because it's not happening as fast as I think it should be, right? Well, you know, I mean, where is this person today as opposed to where they were 3 weeks ago? Well, I mean, they've actually done this, they've done that, they've done this. Okay, so they made progress, just not at the speed you want, right? And it's interesting. It's I had a conversation with somebody this weekend where she said the hardest thing that she's finding in coaching and having coaching conversations is being comfortable with silence, right? She's having a very difficult time with silence and she sees it as uncomfortable. I asked her to, in we were doing coaching, a coaching session, as a practice, and I asked her to describe those words. I asked her to describe what coaching meant. I mean, what silence meant for her. And she said, actually, I wrote it down because it was interesting. I'm not breaking confidences here, but she said silence equals death, isolation, coldness, loneliness, erasure. right? And a lot of it, the way she grew up and the way she had, in her family was highly interactive, brothers and sisters. Mom was very social, very much an extrovert. And so, and one of her mom's statements all the time was, don't be boring, right? And so if somebody was silent, if it was quiet, there must have been something wrong, right? And so one of the questions I asked her was, you know, and she understands the value in the silence. And I said, well, what if, how would you feel about the idea of silence being space for folks to be able to answer the questions you ask? And just that shift in seeing silence as negative to space. She loves space. She loves open spaces. I said, what is the idea of space bring to you? Open fields and, possibilities, right? For me, space means that's something that I get to create. I get to fill with stuff or put on the walls or color. If I have a box, I get to color within that box. Just give me the parameters that you need. What are the things I cannot do, right? And then let me handle my business. And, just give me the specifics of what is expected of me and what space do I have to create in it. And then let me go, right? And so that's for her seeing silence in a coaching conversation, changing that to the space that's required. Introverts need 6 to 10 seconds to come up with a question or an answer to a question or comment that you just asked them. And on average,
Mhm.
we need 5 to 7 seconds, right? We usually give people less than a second to do this, right? This thing about our regular conversations, what did silence mean? Right. And silence means either acquiescence or just move on forward or, oh, they didn't ask anything, so I can move forward because I'm nervous. Right. You know,
Mhm.
um, or well, if they have anything, they'll talk to me later. So we just ignore it and let it go. When very often, if you're asking somebody a direct question, they may think, okay, so what exactly, how do I want to answer this? And I don't know. That's how I start every class that I teach with that 5 to 7 seconds. We give people less than a second. Why? Because how many introverts are in the room, right? And how many people continue to not be served by not allowing for silence? And
Mhm.
so what does that do for engagement? Oh, well, they're not going to wait for me to think about it, so screw it, go ahead and do your thing. And then what happens there? The extroverts that speak up, they get heard. So what's the opinion then? Oh, well, extroverts are, they have more to say. They're more interested. Introverts are disinterested. They're not as forceful. They're not as assertive. So maybe they're not leadership material, right? I mean, these are assumptions that our brain connects the dots, right? When we have that open space, we fill it in with our own assumptions. And, when so for her, silence, the assumption was that it was not just a negative, but cataclysmic death. Right.
Mm. That's
And so,
big.
right. So
Mhm.
she was, okay. So yeah, I feel much better now thinking about that's the space that people need. I like space. I want space. Right. And it's just a mind shift from, one idea of the word, one idea of a concept to a new idea of a concept. Right. But and then she did say, "Oh, I don't get it. I'm 54 years old. Why haven't I thought of that before?" I said, "Well, I mean, if this is what you believe and this is what you were raised with, this is our go-to. This we don't think about it unless we're challenged to think about it. And how often are you challenged to be thought, especially, I mean, she's a professor, right? And so how often is a professor challenged in their own, space? How often are we challenged? We get challenged every now and then. There's people who definitely want us to, put up or shut up, but how often do people just go along with it and give us the benefit of the doubt, whether they agree with us or not? Right.
Right.
And so you hear that enough, you start believing your own bullshit.
Mhm.
You start believing that you have all the answers and that they're irrefutable. And if somebody brings up something that's contrary to that, you might have a response, and that kills engagement. right? And then that's
Yeah,
not being empathetic and it's not being self-aware, right?
exactly. Exactly. So, so where do we go from here is the question, right?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we start to develop it? I think that most people have one area of emotional intelligence that probably comes very natural to them. What's really interesting about like the empathy is that I'm pretty in tune with what other people are feeling, but that's a trauma response. So that's a whole deeper hole to dig because I need to know how to react to somebody else just from the space of safety. And so I'm
Mhm.
really good with people who are agitated, really good with people as long as I'm not close to them. Because when I'm close to them, then I get judgmental and I'm working on that, work in progress.
Yeah.
But when we start to think about all of these different components of emotional intelligence, I don't know what resources you have, but I have a few in mind if you're looking to develop in these different areas. The first one with the self awareness, find, I mean, you can just Google online emotional intelligence self assessment, and there's lots of free options that you can connect to online just to see where you're at in different areas. Um, I also will say we don't always have a good grasp of emotional language, especially if you grew up or you are from a culture where speaking about your emotions is taboo or being emotional is taboo. You may be very limited in being able to be aware of what you're actually feeling. So I highly recommend Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. And if you're not a reader, she has a 5-part series on Max of the same name, Atlas of the Heart, where she gives language to a lot of emotions and what they feel like and what they look like so that we can identify what we're really experiencing. Like I learned that jealousy and envy are not the same thing. And I didn't really know the difference between the two, but now I do. I found out I'm not really jealous. I can be envious. Um, so that's like one tip, like expand your emotional vocabulary so that you will understand a little bit more about like your own experience and what that feels like. When it comes to emotional regulation, I will say like just be aware or acknowledge your experience and maybe what you're feeling and how those feelings dictate your behaviors, your choices right after. So, for example, I know that if I'm sad, I don't like sadness. I'm pretty comfortable with most emotions, but I really don't like to feel sad. And so when I'm sad, I shop. I buy stuff because why? Because I get that little dopamine hit from add to cart. And so if I catch myself um, doing a lot of shopping, especially like online shopping, I try to check in with myself to say, what am I feeling right now? Because I don't need any of this stuff. So what is it that I'm feeling? And usually I'm sad or something's going on. But know what your triggers are, know what again what your reactions are and really think about what would be more useful. Not every reaction's a bad reaction. Can I just say like emotional regulation is not about removing all emotion from your life. That's not at all. If I say this all the time, if you don't feel emotion, seek therapy because there's something genuinely wrong with you. If you don't feel any emotion, that's not normal. That's not the goal
Yeah.
of emotional intelligence at all. So, emotional regulation, really tap into what your triggers are and think about what you want from that interaction and find something that works for you. And it might take some trial and error to find out like what it is. Like I always, I don't have one with me right now, but I almost always have a beverage. And I say, when I'm feeling emotional, before I respond, I take a sip of whatever it is to give me those 5 to 7 seconds to get my life together. Because remember, my first instinct is to hurt your feelings. And I don't want to be that person. So that gives me just enough time to like process a little bit before before the bangs come back. And then of course, empathy. I just to make it really simple, replace your judgment with curiosity. Replace judgment with curiosity and really just be interested in what other people are experiencing. and not be afraid to acknowledge like what you see and check in. This is what I'm noticing. What do you think? This is what I'm sensing. How are you experiencing from your perspective? We didn't talk a lot about relationship management. I think maybe we can table that for another time. Um, I think that's a really big topic, relationships, especially at work. But if I had to give a quick hot tip on the relationship management is this: be friendly to all, but be friends with few. That's it. That's my only hot tip I have there. Be friendly to all, be friends with few. What do you say, Tango?
Yeah, pretty much everything you said. I mean, just been thinking about when it comes to, emotional awareness, be aware of, who you are, how you're feeling, just get to know yourself, right? If there's something that you are struggling with, I mean, what makes you tick? What is something that, you respond to and why, right? Just think, I mean, you mentioned emotional intelligence, emotional awareness assessment. I mean, do a Myers-Briggs, do a disc, right?
Yeah.
Do the five love languages, right? Any type of self-awareness to why you feel the certain way that you feel allows you to say, okay, I'm feeling this, I learned this, I'm prepared for it, rather than, oh, it's coming up on me, I don't know how to respond, which
Mhm.
leads to fight, flight, or fright responses, right? Fight, fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, right?
Mhm.
So absolutely. With the emotional regulation, know your triggers, know your red flags. When you see them, how do you respond? Where does it come from? And ask yourself, what else do I need to know before I make that response? Because, and, if you're not asking a question, it's usually a judgment,
Mhm.
right? And just think about how you like to be judged, right? It goes both ways. With the social awareness, that be curious, right? When you see a shift in energy, a shift in how people are speaking, when somebody lights up, when they sit up straight, right? Or, if maybe they're asking questions or maybe they're not nodding their head with you anymore. What's going on? How are you feeling? Right? There's a word that you say that causes them to shift their head this way. How are you feeling about that? Right? And to be brave and be vulnerable. Ask the question, how are you responding to me? Right? You just noticed. And it doesn't have to, you seem frustrated. You don't even have to, it's like we talked about with the Nostr model and the change management. Yeah, I'm sensing an emotion. What's going on?
Mhm.
Right? And let them answer that emotion. That's building their competence, right? You're teaching somebody how to fish rather than just keep giving them those fishes that have too many bones and they're always going to find an excuse for why it ain't any good. You know why it ain't any good? Because it's not theirs. Right. So
Right.
yeah, and then the last one, relationship management. We talked a little bit about that, but just recognizing, the what are the needs for relationship management, psychological safety, like we've already talked about, right? Motivations, having an understanding of that other person, right? And recognizing common sense ain't common, right? And the other people have, things that are important to them, and that's just as valid as what's important to you, right? And so we definitely can have much more conversation about that. I mean, there's so much that goes into that idea of, relationship management, that people don't often think about because they're too busy. We're too busy in our own heads. It's not about us, but our brain wants it to be about us. So if we're not careful, we will continue to believe it's about us. So, be engaged in the conversation. Other people may not have the right answer, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
The right answer to you may not mean that it's wrong to somebody else. So really, how do we help that person to see that even if we're not 100% the same person, We're on the same page and we're on the same team,
Right.
right? I'm here for your best interest. So let me know when I am not serving your best interest, especially as a leader.
Mm-hmm. And if and when you get to that space where you cannot be interested in what other people are experiencing, or the compassion or the empathy has been exhausted, do yourself and everybody else a favor and go do something else. Period. I'll drop the mic on that one. Go do something
Always
else.
reschedule. You can always reschedule. You can always go get a cup of coffee. You can always table the conversation in a positive way. Well, we're going to have to come back because, you're not making any sense.
That's not, no.
Right. So, it's definitely something to think about, what is that when you're pointing at somebody else, there's three coming back at you, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're throwing up gang signs, Tiff. I mean, geez, right?
Oops. Hold on. Let me put the bangs. Then I'm just joking.
Bang, bang, Bizak. Yeah, there it
I'm not
is.
exactly. I'm gonna have to get all the scissors out of my office just in case. Now I'm thinking about making bad decisions. No. Um, what I meant is not just in the moment to get out of it, but I'm saying like big picture. If you're in human services and you are like, I just can't be empathetic to people, think of another career path. If you're in leadership and you hate everybody and everybody's a moron, think about maybe something else. Like
Yeah.
emotional intelligence is a skill, and sometimes again you can't overskill where it's just not working anymore. Be willing to make changes for yourself as well. Like that part of that self-awareness is knowing when you've reached the top, and maybe that's as far as you can go, and it might be some time to explore maybe some different options.
And that's an important thing to remember. Emotional intelligence, you might be more predisposed to it, but it is always a skill to develop. Just
Yep,
because you
absolutely.
are more naturally empathetic doesn't mean that you use that empathy in a good way. Use your powers for
Right.
good. You have to hone your skills.
Right.
Superman did not know how to fly until he actually was able to control how he landed, right?
Right.
So I just made that one up. I think I like that one. But
Be
that
patient
that
with
that
the process though. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so I mean that's the nuts and bolts of emotional intelligence. We'll definitely come back to the topic, and we'll probably have some people come and talk to us about it, somewhere in the future. But thank you everyone for your likes and follows. You guys, we enjoy doing what we're doing, and seeing the responses we're seeing, just in some of the numbers is definitely encouraging. And I feel like, we're on the right track with some things, and it's encouraging us. And so I don't know, did you want to have some questions for folks? Some of those keeping it questions, what is what are your triggers, right? What are your things that can keep you from being engaged, empathetic, and supportive,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I would also add a little bit of like homework,
Mm-hmm.
is go back and look at one of your maybe more difficult relationships in life, and then determine how could you choose more empathy in that relationship,
Yeah.
because you might find it's not them, it might be you. So remove some of that judgment. How can you be a bit more curious there?
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. So
That's,
homework, folks. And
yeah.
please let us know what you discover in the comments or on our Facebook page, our IG page. We post stuff all the time. So, um, and
I have one more ask. I just thought of it. Sorry, Carl. I know you're
go
on the
for it.
roll. I'm not. The silence was. I chose that open space right now. He took a breath. That's how I knew it was my turn. Um, I would ask too if you all want to share your maybe some of your healthy coping mechanisms for regulation, like self-regulation. Like, what are some things that you do to help keep you emotionally even? If you have something that works well for you, again, you don't know what you don't know. So if anybody has some hot tips that they can offer, we're open to that as well.
Very cool. Yeah, which should fit in nicely with, our conversation on wellness,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely, which will be coming up soon. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, Tiff, speaking of wellness and exiting a conversation, I think there's a good time to it's a good time to walk away, you know.
Hmm.
And just like Clint Eastwood would say, don't walk away angry, just walk away. So
Well, I'm gonna walk away and get ready for I have a virtual week, but I say have fun in Mono. Tell all my homies I said hello.
all right.
Um, I'm an all virtual month. I got no travel this month. I mean,
Ooh,
I'm personally traveling, but I don't have any work travel this month. I don't know how I swung that bat, but I did, and I'm gonna embrace it.
wow. Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So be
I can't say
jealous.
that. I can't say that at all. So, but I will have some times where I get to put my shorts on.
Here you go.
All right, folks. Well, until next time, I'm Carl,
And I'm Tiff.
and let's keep it real, y'all. Let's keep it,
Keep it real
yeah,
for sure. Hold on, the fingers. Gang signs. What are we throwing? I'll just
keep it
throw peace
real,
sign. Why not?
keep it real bangy, y'all. Yeah.
Yeah.